The year was 2187, and humanity had spread across the solar system like seeds carried by cosmic winds. Mars held 3 million colonists who worked the red soil and breathed recycled air in pressurized domes. Europa's ice mines sent water shipments back to Earth every month. The asteroid belt was dotted with mining stations where rough men and women pulled precious metals from ancient rocks. Earth itself held 12 billion souls who looked up at the stars and believed they were alone in the universe. They were wrong about that. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the command chair of Sentinel-7, a monitoring station that orbited in the cold darkness beyond Neptune. His shift had started 6 hours ago and would not end for another 10. The work was boring most days, watching sensor screens for anomalies that never came, checking systems that never failed, drinking coffee that always tasted like recycled water because that was exactly what it was. Jake was 42 years old with gray starting to show in his dark hair, and he had been stationed here for 3 years. Most people thought deep space monitoring was a punishment posting, but Jake liked the quiet. Lieutenant Sophie Blake sat at the science station to his left. She was 28, brilliant, and completely obsessed with the strange readings that had been appearing on her screens for the past 6 months. Jake watched her lean closer to her display, her blonde hair falling forward as she traced something with her finger. She had been telling him for weeks that something was happening out there in the dark spaces between stars. Earth Command thought she was seeing ghosts in the data, but Jake had learned to trust her instincts. "Commander, you need to see this," Sophie said without looking up. Her voice had that edge it always got when she found something interesting. Jake unbuckled from his chair and floated over in the low gravity. The screen showed energy signatures that spiked and fell in patterns that looked almost like waves on an ocean. "What am I looking at?" "Weapons fire," Sophie said quietly. "Big weapons. The kind that could crack a moon in half. And it's getting closer, far beyond human space, in a region of stars that Earth's telescopes could barely see. A war had been raging for 300 years. The Kalvari Empire swept through systems like locusts, taking what they wanted and destroying what they could not use. They were insectoid creatures, 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and minds that understood only conquest and hierarchy. Their ships were grown rather than built, organic technology that healed itself and adapted to threats. They had destroyed 40 civilizations and enslaved 100 more. Standing against them was the Federation of Sentient Worlds, a loose alliance of species who had banded together out of desperation rather than friendship. The Federation was losing. They had been losing for a century. Their fleet grew smaller each year while the Kalvari bred new warriors and grew new ships in vast orbital nurseries. The Federation had done everything they could to slow the Kalvari advance, including something they were not proud of. They had hidden Earth. High Commander Vrel stood on the bridge of the Federation flagship, Endeavor of Light, and watched the tactical display with eyes that could see in spectrums humans had no names for. He was Thelosian, a species that looked almost human except for the silver skin and the fact that they had 3 hearts. Vrel had been fighting the Kalvari for 60 years, which was not long for a species that lived 3 centuries. He had watched friends die and worlds burn, and now he was watching the defensive barrier around Earth's solar system begin to fail. The barrier was not a physical thing. It was a network of satellites that bent light and distorted sensor readings, making Earth's star appear unremarkable and its planets seem lifeless. The Federation had placed it there 70 years ago when their scouts first detected radio signals coming from the blue world. The humans were primitive then, barely beginning to understand atomic energy. The Federation Council had debated for years about whether to make contact. In the end, they decided to wait and watch. Young species were unpredictable. Some became peaceful allies. Others became threats worse than the Kalvari. Now the Kalvari were pushing too close and the barrier was failing, and Vrel had to decide whether to reveal Earth's existence or let the humans remain hidden. It was not an easy choice. If the Kalvari found Earth, they would strip the solar system clean and add humanity to their list of conquered species. But if Vrel pulled back Federation forces to defend the barrier, he would lose 7 other colony worlds that held billions of lives. Captain Helen Rivers commanded the Earth vessel Discovery, which was the most advanced ship humanity had ever built. It was still primitive by galactic standards, powered by fusion reactors and armed with railguns that threw metal slugs at a fraction of light speed. Helen was 36 years old, with red hair kept short for zero gravity and green eyes that missed nothing. She had spent 15 years working her way up from shuttle pilot to starship captain, and she loved her ship the way some people love their children. Discovery was conducting surveys near Saturn, mapping the moons, and analyzing the rings for minerals worth mining. Lieutenant Greg Palmer sat at the helm, his hands steady on the controls. He was 24 and cocky in the way young pilots always were, but he had the skills to back up his attitude. Chief Officer Lisa Grant worked at the engineering station, monitoring the ship's systems with the constant worry of someone who knew exactly how many things could go wrong in deep space. She was 32 and had kept Discovery running through 3 years of hard service. "Captain, I'm getting something weird on sensors," Greg said. He touched his screen and frowned. "There's energy discharges out past the heliopause. Big ones." Helen moved to look over his shoulder. The display showed flashes of radiation and electromagnetic pulses that had no natural explanation. "Could be solar activity from another star," she said, but she did not sound convinced. "That's what I thought at first," Greg said. "But the patterns are wrong. Solar flares don't fire back and forth at each other." Lisa looked up from her station. "Captain, if those are weapons, they're firing at ranges that should be impossible. The energy required would be enormous." Helen made a decision. "Change course. Take us closer. I want a better look at whatever is happening out there." At that moment, millions of kilometers away, the war that humanity knew nothing about reached a critical point. A Calvari battle group broke through the Federation defensive line and pushed deep into the protected zone. War Prince Jarak commanded the Calvari fleet from his flagship, Eternal Conquest. He was a veteran of 1,000 battles, his carapace scarred from combat, and his mind focused on nothing but victory. He saw the Federation ships retreating and ordered his fleet to pursue. His sensors detected the barrier around Earth's system, but he paid it no attention. Whatever primitive species lived there could wait. First, he would crush the Federation fleet. Commander Vrel watched the Calvari ships closing and knew his worst fear was about to come true. The war was coming to Earth, whether humanity was ready or not. The Calvari fleet tore through the protective barrier like a knife through paper, and suddenly every sensor on Sentinel-7 screamed warnings. Jake Morrison stared at his screens as dozens of massive contacts appeared where empty space should have been. The signatures were enormous, far larger than anything humanity had ever built. Sophie Blake's hands flew across her console, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Ships. Alien ships. And they were heading toward the inner solar system. "Get me Earth Command right now," Jake said. His voice stayed calm, but his heart hammered in his chest. Sophie opened the communication channel and Jake began transmitting everything their sensors were recording. Somewhere in Geneva, in the headquarters of the United Earth Space Command, people were about to learn that humanity was not alone, and their new neighbors were bringing war. Admiral Peter Collins received the transmission at 0400 hours local time. He was 60 years old with steel gray hair and a face that had forgotten how to smile during 40 years of military service. He read the report twice, checked the sensor data 3 times, and then began making calls. Within an hour, every high-ranking military officer and government official on Earth was being woken up and told the news. Humanity had first contact, and it was not what anyone had hoped for. Vice Admiral Claire Hughes arrived at headquarters 30 minutes after the call. She was 55 with dark skin and eyes that could cut through excuses like lasers. She had spent her career preparing for theoretical threats, and now those theories were becoming very real. She stood next to Collins in the command center and watched the tactical display update with new information. 2 fleets were fighting out beyond Neptune. One was retreating, the other was pursuing, and both were heading toward Earth. Captain Helen Rivers watched the same battle from the bridge of Discovery. The ship had moved closer to the disturbances, and now their sensors could see details that terrified and amazed her. Ships the size of cities exchanged fire that lit up space like miniature suns. Explosions bloomed in silence. She saw one vessel, sleek and silver, take multiple hits and begin venting atmosphere. Its engines flickered and died, and it started to drift. "That ship is dying," Lisa Grant said quietly. "There are life signs aboard." Helen felt every eye on the bridge turn toward her. Discovery was an exploration vessel, not a warship. Her crew numbered 60 people, and their weapons were designed to destroy asteroids, not fight in space battles. But that ship had people on it, and they were dying, and Helen Rivers had not become a captain by playing it safe. "Greg, take us in." "Lisa, prepare the docking system. We're getting those people out." The Discovery moved toward the damaged vessel, with a grace that made Greg Palmer look like the artist he was. He threaded through debris fields and dodged energy weapons fire that was not aimed at them but could kill them just as dead. The alien ship grew larger on their screens, its hull scarred and broken. Lisa managed to create a seal with one of their airlocks, and the boarding team went through. What they found inside was a scene from a nightmare. The corridor was filled with smoke, and the lighting flickered. Bodies floated in zero gravity, some human-like, and others very much not. The team found survivors in what looked like a command center. Most were unconscious, but one figure stood upright, held in place by magnetic boots. He was tall with silver skin, and when he turned toward the humans, his eyes went wide with something that might have been surprise. Commander Vrel had not expected to see humans today. The Federation had worked so hard to keep them isolated and safe. Now, here they were, boarding his dying ship to rescue his crew. He tried to speak, but the translation system was damaged. One of the human females, the one with engineer insignia, pulled out a portable computer and began working on establishing communication. It took 10 minutes of frantic work while the ship groaned around them, but finally a synthesized voice spoke from the device. "I am Commander Vrel of the Federation of Sentient Worlds. You should not be here. Your people are in grave danger." The humans helped evacuate 47 survivors from the Sovereign Wind before the ship's reactor went critical. They brought Vrel and his crew aboard Discovery, and Helen took them to the medical bay. Vrel was injured but conscious. He sat on a bed while Lisa Grant's translation program worked to bridge the gap between their languages. What Vrel told them in the next hour changed everything humanity thought they knew about the universe. The Kalvari Empire had been conquering systems for centuries. They did not negotiate or show mercy. They would strip every resource from Earth's solar system and enslave or kill every human they found. The Federation had tried to protect Earth by keeping them hidden, but that protection had failed. War was coming, whether humanity wanted it or not. Sophie Blake, listening to the transmission from Discovery, worked frantically on the data Vrel had provided. Buried in the Federation database was technical information about Kalvari ships, their weapons, their tactics. She found something that made her hands shake. The Kalvari shields operated on specific frequencies that created harmonic weak points. The Federation had never been able to exploit this because their weapons technology was not compatible. But human weapons, crude as they were, used different principles. Human railguns and plasma weapons might work where Federation energy beams failed. On Mars Colony Alpha, Governor Dan Foster received an emergency transmission from Earth Command. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel immediately." A hostile alien force was entering the solar system. Dan was 51 years old and had spent 20 years building the Mars colony from nothing. He looked out over the domes and tunnels that held 200,000 people and made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in peacetime. He was not evacuating. Instead, he called Chief Security Officer Rachel Moore to his office. "Rachel, I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy," Dan said. "I need you to turn our mining equipment into weapons." Rachel Moore was 38 and had served 10 years in Earth's military before coming to Mars. She understood exactly what Dan was proposing. "You want to fight." "I want to be ready to fight," Dan corrected. "If these aliens come here expecting easy prey, I want to surprise them." Back on Earth, Admiral Collins made the hardest decision of his career. He activated Operation Homebound, recalling every military vessel in the solar system. Cargo haulers were armed with whatever weapons could be mounted on them. Civilian ships volunteered to join the defense fleet. In orbital shipyards, workers began around-the-clock shifts to upgrade weapons systems with the data Sophie Blake had transmitted. The cavalry war prince Zarak watched his sensors as his fleet pursued the retreating Federation forces. He noticed the primitive vessels moving about the inner system, but paid them little attention. The humans were clearly a young species, barely capable of leaving their home world. After he destroyed the Federation ships, he would deal with the humans at his leisure. He ordered a single destroyer, the Devouring Claw, to eliminate any human craft that got in his way. It was an afterthought, a minor task, to be handled by a minor ship. That dismissive attitude would prove to be a fatal mistake. War Prince Jarak did not yet understand what Sophie Blake had discovered in her analysis. He did not know that human weapons technology, primitive as it was, represented a threat his shields were not designed to counter. He did not know that humanity had been preparing for war since the moment they climbed down from the trees. Most importantly, he did not know that humans had a saying, "Cornered animals fight the hardest." Captain Helen Rivers stood on the bridge of Discovery with Commander Vrel beside her. The Federation officer had recovered enough to stand, and he watched the tactical display with experienced eyes. The Calvari destroyer was moving toward them, weapons charging. Discovery was outmatched in every measurable way. But Helen had not survived 15 years in space by accepting defeat. She turned to Greg Palmer with a smile that had no humor in it. "Greg, remember that crazy maneuver you wanted to try near Saturn?" Greg's eyes lit up. "The one you said was too dangerous?" "Yeah, that one. Do it." The Discovery dove into Saturn's rings like a bird fleeing a hawk. Greg Palmer's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision as he threw the ship into a spiral pattern that used the planet's gravity to build impossible speed. Behind them, the Calvari destroyer Devouring Claw followed with weapons hot and targeting systems locked. The alien commander had expected a quick kill, but the human ship was proving surprisingly difficult to hit. Ice particles the size of houses flashed past the viewports. Greg threaded Discovery through gaps that should have been impossible to navigate. The destroyer was larger and more powerful, but it was not built for this kind of flying. Its weapons fire carved through the rings, vaporizing ice and rock but missing the target. On the Discovery's bridge, Lisa Grant worked frantically at her engineering station, sweat running down her face despite the cold air. "Captain, I'm routing power from life support to the mining equipment," Lisa said. "If this doesn't work, we're going to run out of air in about 20 minutes. Helen Rivers kept her eyes on the tactical display. "If this doesn't work, we'll be dead in 2 minutes. So let's not worry about the air." Commander Vrel stood beside Helen, gripping a support rail as the ship shook from violent maneuvering. He had fought the Calvari for 60 years and never seen anyone try something this reckless. Humans, he was beginning to understand, did not have the same sense of self-preservation most species possessed. They had something else. Something that made them dangerous. "Now, Greg," Helen said calmly. Greg Palmer pulled the ship into a tight turn that made the hull groan with stress. The Discovery came out of the rings at a vector that put them behind the destroyer for exactly 3 seconds. It was enough. Lisa Grant fired every mining plasma cutter the ship had, all of them calibrated to the exact frequency Sophie Blake had identified as the Calvari shield weak point. The beams struck home, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the destroyer's shields collapsed. The plasma beams cut into the hull, slicing through armor that should have been impenetrable. Explosions rippled along the Calvari ship's flank. Its weapons went offline. Its engines stuttered and died. The Devouring Claw began to drift, venting atmosphere and escape pods. "Target neutralized," Greg said. His voice shook slightly. Helen allowed herself one breath of relief before switching back into command mode. "It's still mostly intact," Lisa replied, checking her sensors. The reactor is stable, and the hull breaches are contained to 3 sections. If we board her now, we could secure the vessel. Do it, Helen ordered. We need that technology, and we need it yesterday. The boarding operation took 4 hours. The Discovery's crew, none of whom had military combat training, cleared the damaged destroyer section by section. They found it mostly empty, the Calvari crew having abandoned ship. What they also found was a treasure trove of intact systems and computer cores filled with data. Lisa Grant began downloading everything she could while Helen transmitted their victory back to Earth Command. Admiral Peter Collins sat in the command center in Geneva and read the combat report 3 times. A human exploration vessel, armed with nothing but mining equipment, had defeated a Calvari warship. The aliens were not invincible. That changed everything. He stood up and addressed the room full of officers who were all reading the same report. Operation Homebound is now a combat operation, Collins announced. Every ship we have gets armed and ready. We're not running. We're fighting. Vice Admiral Claire Hughes took control of the retrofit program. The orbital shipyards above Earth's moon became a hive of activity that never stopped. Workers installed weapons on cargo haulers and passenger liners. Engineers studied the Calvari technology from the captured destroyer and began adapting human systems to exploit alien weaknesses. Chief Engineer Alan Price, a 45-year-old genius who had designed half of humanity's space infrastructure, led the technical teams and pushed them past every limit. I need this done in 72 hours, Claire told Alan. You'll have it in 60, Alan replied. Commander Jake Morrison and his entire crew from Sentinel-7 volunteered for combat duty. Jake found himself assigned as a tactical officer on the Admiral's flagship, using his 3 years of deep space monitoring experience to track Calvari fleet movements. Sophie Blake was brought to Earth and given her own laboratory in the Xenotechnology Division. She worked alongside recovered Federation scientists, combining human innovation with alien knowledge to create new weapons. On Mars, Governor Dan Foster's gamble was about to be tested. 6 Calvari ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and entered Mars orbit. They were scout vessels, sent ahead to survey this primitive colony before the main fleet arrived. The Calvari commander expected to find helpless civilians and easy resources. Instead, his sensors detected power signatures activating across the Martian surface. Rachel Moore sat in the command bunker beneath Mars Colony Alpha and watched the tactical display. The mining railguns they had converted to weapons were hidden in natural formations across the planet's surface. The Calvari ships moved into position, clearly preparing to begin planetary bombardment. Rachel waited until they were at optimal range. All batteries, fire, she said. 30 railgun batteries opened up simultaneously. Metal slugs accelerated to a fraction of light speed, tore into space. The Calvari shields, designed to stop energy weapons, offered little protection against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. 2 destroyers exploded immediately. A third took critical damage and began falling toward Mars. The remaining 3 ships broke orbit and fled, transmitting distress signals to their main fleet. Dan Foster allowed himself a tight smile. War Prince Jarak received the reports from Mars with growing rage. He had lost 3 ships to primitive weapons. The destroyer, Devouring Claw, had been captured. The human vessels were proving far more troublesome than intelligence had predicted. This was supposed to be a minor detour, a quick conquest before pursuing the Federation fleet. Now it was becoming an embarrassment. Jarak made a decision that would doom his fleet. Pride and anger overrode tactical sense. He would not allow these humans to humiliate the Calvari Empire. He ordered his entire armada, 97 warships, including his massive flagship, Eternal Conquest, to converge on Earth. He would crush this upstart species and teach the galaxy what happened to those who defied the Calvari. Commander Vrel, still aboard the Discovery, learned of Jarek's decision through Federation intelligence channels. He immediately contacted what remained of the Federation fleet, 12 ships, all that could be spared from other fronts, agreed to come to Earth's aid. It was a token force, but the symbolism mattered. For the first time in Federation history, they would fight alongside a newly contacted species as equals. On Earth, the defense fleet assembled. 208 human vessels of every type and size gathered in formation between the moon and their home world. Cargo ships bristled with hastily mounted weapons. Passenger liners had been converted to troop carriers. Military cruisers, designed for patrol duty, had been upgraded with technology that was untested but promising. It was not much compared to what was coming, but it was everything humanity had. Admiral Collins stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Defiance, his flagship. Vice Admiral Hughes commanded the carrier Resolute and the second battle group. Captain Helen Rivers brought Discovery into formation with the forward screen. The crew that had won humanity's first victory against the Calvary took their place of honor at the front of the fleet. Sophie Blake worked in Earth Command, monitoring sensor feeds and coordinating the frequency targeting data that would be critical to the battle plan. Jake Morrison stood beside Admiral Collins. His 3 years of watching empty space now turned to tracking an approaching armada. Every human who could contribute to the defense was doing so, from the engineers maintaining the ships to the communication officers keeping the fleet connected. The Calvary fleet entered Earth's solar system at 0400 hours. 97 ships of various classes, led by the Eternal Conquest, which was 3 kilometers long and bristled with weapons. They came in standard formation, confident in their superiority, expecting human resistance to crumble at the first sight of their power. War Prince Zarak stood in his command center and looked at the primitive human fleet with contempt. They would learn their place in the galactic order. Admiral Collins watched the alien armada approach and felt no fear, only determination. He opened a fleet-wide channel so every human in every ship could hear his words. This is Admiral Collins to all vessels. Today we face an enemy that has conquered 40 civilizations. They expect us to run or surrender. They think we're primitive and weak. Let's show them what humans do when someone threatens our home. The distance closed. Weapons charged. 2 fleets faced each other across the void. One ancient and powerful, the other young and desperate. In that moment before the first shot was fired, the course of galactic history balanced on a knife edge. The battle for Earth began at 0600 hours, with a silence that was somehow louder than any sound. The Calvary fleet advanced in 3 waves, 97 ships moving with the confidence of a civilization that had never known defeat. War Prince Zarak stood in his command center aboard the Eternal Conquest and watched the human fleet through sensors that could analyze every ship's composition, power output, and weapons capability. What he saw confirmed his assumptions. The humans were hopelessly outmatched. Admiral Peter Collins stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the same tactical display. His fleet of 208 ships looked impressive until you realized most were cargo vessels with welded-on weapons or patrol boats never meant for real combat. The 12 Federation ships under Commander Vrel's command added firepower but not enough to change the mathematics of the battle. Collins had spent 40 years in the military studying famous battles, brilliant tactics, and historical strategies. None of them addressed how to win when the enemy had overwhelming superiority in every category that mattered, so he would not try to win conventionally. All ships, Collins transmitted, execute scatter pattern Omega on my mark. The Calvary first wave came within range and opened fire. Massive energy beams lanced across space, enough firepower to vaporize mountains. They struck empty space. The human fleet had exploded into hundreds of individual trajectories, every ship breaking formation and moving on seemingly random vectors. The carefully planned Calvary targeting solutions suddenly had no targets. Their weapons fire cut through empty space while human vessels scattered like a school of fish avoiding a predator. War Prince Zarak watched in confusion as his perfectly organized assault dissolved into chaos. The humans were not fighting like a fleet. They were fighting like individuals, each ship independent and unpredictable. His tactical computer tried to track 200 different targets, all moving erratically. Before he could adjust, the humans struck back. Every human ship fired at once, their weapons calibrated to the exact frequencies Sophie Blake had identified. The effect was devastating. The Calvari first wave, 28 ships in tight formation, suddenly found their shields collapsing under weapons that should have been ineffective. Railgun rounds punched through armor, plasma cutters carved into hulls. Missiles that the Calvari had dismissed as primitive found weak points and exploded deep inside their targets. In the first 30 seconds of combat, 9 Calvari ships were destroyed outright, and 7 more took critical damage. Lieutenant Greg Palmer flew a squadron of modified mining shuttles, small craft that the Calvari targeting systems barely registered as threats. He led 15 shuttles through the enemy formation, weaving between the massive alien ships, while his squadron launched their payloads. Mining charges, designed to crack asteroids, stuck to Calvari hulls and detonated with precise timing. A carrier lost its launch bays. A destroyer had its command section blown open to space. The small craft were too numerous and too fast for the large Calvari ships to target effectively. On the lunar surface, Chief Engineer Alan Price commanded the defensive batteries. Arrays of railguns that had been built in just 60 hours opened fire, their projectiles crossing the distance to the Calvari second wave in seconds. The aliens had not expected ground-based fire, and their formation bunched together to concentrate their shields. It was exactly what Collins wanted. The railgun fire forced the Calvari ships into predictable patterns, which allowed the human fleet to anticipate their movements. But the Calvari were not helpless. War Prince Jarak recovered from his initial surprise and began adapting. He ordered his ships to rotate their shield frequencies randomly, which reduced the effectiveness of the human weapons. The battle became a grinding slugfest. Human ships began dying. The cruiser Valiant took a direct hit that split it in half. The destroyer Armstrong was crippled and crashed into the moon's surface, its crew dying on impact. Cargo haulers that had no business being in combat exploded under fire they could not withstand. Vice Admiral Claire Hughes, commanding from the Resolute, watched the casualty reports climb and felt each loss like a physical blow. But she also saw something else in the tactical data. The Calvari were good at fleet combat, at coordinated assaults, and defensive formations. They were not good at dealing with chaos. Every time the human ships broke pattern and acted independently, the Calvari response slowed. Commander Jake Morrison stood beside Admiral Collins on the Defiance and studied the enemy fleet movements. He had spent 3 years watching sensor screens in deep space, learning to see patterns in noise. Now he saw a pattern in the Calvari formations. Every ship was constantly adjusting its position based on signals from the flagship. The Eternal Conquest was not just commanding the fleet. It was controlling the shield frequency rotations. If that ship went down, the entire Calvari fleet would lose coordination. "Admiral, I know how to win this," Jake said quietly. Collins looked at him. "Tell me." "We kill the flagship, not damage it, kill it. Without Jarak's command ship coordinating their defenses, every Calvari vessel will be vulnerable." Collins studied the tactical display. The Eternal Conquest sat in the center of the enemy formation, protected by dozens of warships. Reaching it would require punching through the entire Calvari fleet. Ships would die. A lot of ships. But if they succeeded, they could win. "How many ships would we need?" 30, Jake said. "A suicide run. To draw all their defensive fire. If we can get close enough, the rest of the fleet can hit them with everything we have." Collins made the decision without hesitation. "Prepare the assault group." He opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships. This is Admiral Collins. I am calling for volunteers for a high-risk assault on the enemy flagship. This will be dangerous. Some of us will not come back. But if we succeed, we end this battle." 43 ships volunteered immediately. Collins selected 30, including the Defiance. He would not ask anyone to take a risk. He was not willing to take himself. Captain Helen Rivers volunteered Discovery without hesitation. Greg Palmer plotted the course with the same steady hands that had threaded them through Saturn's rings. Lisa Grant redirected every available system to forward shields. Commander Vrel, standing on the bridge, offered the traditional Thalosian salute to warriors about to face death. "It has been an honor to fight beside humans," Vrel said. "The honor is ours," Helen replied. The Suicide Squadron formed up and began their charge. 30 ships accelerated toward the heart of the Calvari formation. Every alien weapon in the fleet turned toward them. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled space with deadly light. The cruiser Dauntless exploded in the first 5 seconds. The destroyer Phoenix lost shields and began taking hull damage but kept coming. The cargo hauler, Spirit of Mars, armed with nothing but mining equipment and crewed by volunteers, took a direct hit that killed everyone aboard, but the ship's momentum carried it forward for another 10 seconds before it broke apart. The Defiance shuddered under multiple impacts. Shields failed. Hull breaches appeared. Jake Morrison's station exploded in sparks, and he was thrown across the bridge, his arm broken and his face bleeding. But he pulled himself up and kept working. Admiral Collins stood in the center of the bridge, calm as always, directing the assault even as his ship died around him. They reached the Eternal Conquest and unleashed everything they had at point-blank range. The flagship's shields absorbed the punishment, but the distraction was complete. Vice Admiral Hughes, watching from the Resolute, saw the opening. "All ships, concentrate fire on the transmitted coordinates. Everything you have. Now." Sophie Blake, monitoring the battle from Earth Command, had been analyzing the flagship's power distribution. Under the stress of defending against the Suicide Squadron, the Eternal Conquest had diverted power from one section of shielding to reinforce others. She found the weak point and transmitted targeting coordinates to the fleet. 200 ships fired as one. Railguns, plasma weapons, missiles, mining charges, every weapon humanity had created or adapted, launched toward a single point on the flagship's hull. The concentrated barrage struck the exposed reactor coupling. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the Eternal Conquest began to tear itself apart from the inside. War Prince Jarak had time for one final thought before his ship exploded. These humans should have been easy prey. Instead, they were the end of him. The flagship detonated in a blast that lit up the solar system, destroying 2 nearby Calvary cruisers in the explosion. Without their commander and their central coordination, the Calvary fleet dissolved into confusion. Some ships tried to retreat. Others fought on independently. The battle continued for another 3 hours, but the outcome was decided. The remaining Calvary vessels were systematically destroyed or driven from Earth's orbit. Admiral Collins was pulled from the wreckage of the Defiance by a rescue team led by Greg Palmer. The Admiral's first words upon regaining consciousness were about his fleet. The victory came at a terrible cost, but humanity had proven they could stand against any threat. The silence after battle was different from the silence before it. Captain Helen Rivers stood on the bridge of Discovery and looked at the debris field that filled Earth's orbit. Broken ships, human and alien both, drifted in the darkness like monuments to the cost of survival. Her crew was exhausted, several were injured, but they were alive. The same could not be said for 8,417 other humans who had died defending their home. By 1300 hours, the last Calvary vessel had either been destroyed or driven beyond the heliopause. The human fleet, reduced to 146 operational ships, began the grim work of search and rescue. Every escape pod was tracked down. Every hull breach was searched for survivors. Greg Palmer flew shuttle missions for 16 straight hours, pulling wounded crew members from damaged vessels. His hands shook from exhaustion, but he would not stop while there were still people to save. Admiral Peter Collins was found in the wreckage of the Defiance 4 hours after the flagship was hit. He had been trapped in a collapsed section with 3 other officers, all of them kept alive by an emergency force field that was slowly failing. Lieutenant Greg Palmer personally piloted the rescue shuttle that cut through the damaged hull and extracted them. Collins had a broken leg, cracked ribs, and a concussion, but he refused medical evacuation until he could confirm the status of his fleet. "How many ships did we lose?" Collins asked from the stretcher. 62 destroyed, Admiral, Greg replied. Another 30 are too damaged to be repaired. But we won. Collins closed his eyes for a moment. 62 ships. Thousands of lives. The price of victory was always counted in the people who would not come home. But the alternative had been extinction. Get me to Earth, Command. I need to make a report. Commander Vrel stood in the ruins of what had been the Discovery's conference room and composed a message to the Federation Council. The room had taken damage during the battle, with one wall blown open to space and temporarily sealed with emergency plating. But it was still functional, and Vrel needed to send this report immediately. He had witnessed something remarkable today. A species making first contact through combat, and not only surviving, but winning against an enemy that had crushed civilizations 10 times more advanced. The humans fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, Vrel spoke into the recorder. They employed tactics no sane commander would consider, sacrificing ships and lives with a determination I have never seen. But beneath the chaos was calculation. They studied our enemy in hours and found weaknesses we failed to discover in decades. The Federation policy of isolating developing species must be reconsidered. Some species, like humanity, possess qualities that only emerge under pressure. Vice Admiral Claire Hughes landed at Geneva headquarters 12 hours after the battle ended. She had coordinated the cleanup operations from the Resolute, organizing the rescue efforts and establishing a defensive perimeter in case any Calvary ships returned. Now she stood in the command center and looked at the damage assessments. Mars Colony Alpha had suffered heavy bombardment before the Calvary scouts were destroyed. The asteroid mining station, Series 3, was completely gone, vaporized in the opening hours of the conflict. But Earth itself was untouched, and humanity had survived. On Mars, Governor Dan Foster walked through the damaged sections of Colony Alpha with Rachel Moore. The Calvary bombardment had destroyed 3 domes and killed 400 colonists. The survivors were already working on repairs, refusing to abandon the home they had built. Dan watched a crew of engineers assembling a new dome structure and felt a fierce pride. Mars had proven it could defend itself. The colony would rebuild and grow stronger. Sophie Blake sat in her laboratory on Earth, surrounded by alien technology and human innovations. She had not slept in 36 hours, but her mind was racing with possibilities. The captured Calvary destroyer alone contained technology that would advance human science by decades. The Federation database that Commander Vrel had shared contained even more. Humanity had been isolated for so long, developing in a vacuum. Now, they had access to the knowledge of a dozen civilizations. Commander Jake Morrison accepted a promotion to captain and a medal he did not feel he deserved. The ceremony took place in Geneva, with Admiral Collins presiding despite his injuries. Jake had identified the winning strategy, but 62 ships had been destroyed executing it. He would never forget the names of those ships or the people who crewed them. But Collins told him something during the ceremony that helped. We honor the dead by living well and making their sacrifice mean something. 3 days after the battle, Commander Vrel formally invited Earth to join the Federation of Sentient Worlds. The invitation came with full membership, not the junior status usually given to newly contacted species. The Federation Council had reviewed the battle recordings and reached a unanimous decision. Any species that could defeat a Calvary armada deserved an equal voice in galactic affairs. Governor Dan Foster represented Mars at the acceptance ceremony. He insisted that humanity must maintain independence while joining the Federation. We will stand with you against common threats, Dan said. But we make our own decisions about our future. We're partners, not subjects. The Federation agreed. They had seen what happened when someone underestimated humanity. The Calvary had learned that lesson at the cost of an entire fleet. Admiral Collins was promoted to Fleet Admiral and given command of the newly formed Joint Defense Force, a combined human and Federation military unit designed to counter future threats. Claire Hughes became Admiral of Earth's home fleet. Captain Helen Rivers received command of humanity's first true warship, a vessel being built in lunar orbit that combined human and alien technology. It would be named Enterprise, honoring both exploration and the willingness to fight for what mattered. Lieutenant Greg Palmer turned down a promotion and a desk job, choosing instead to train the next generation of combat pilots. He had learned things during the battle that could not be taught from manuals. Chief Engineer Lisa Grant led the reconstruction efforts, overseeing repairs to damaged stations and the construction of new defensive platforms. Alan Price began designing Earth's second generation of warships, vessels built from the ground up to fight in galactic conflicts. Sophie Blake became Earth's first ambassador of xenotechnology, facilitating knowledge exchange between human and alien scientists. She established research facilities on Earth, Mars, and Europa, where scientists from multiple species worked together. The technology sharing went both ways. Humans had innovations in materials, science, and computer systems that impressed even advanced civilizations. The Federation discovered that human creativity and adaptability made them valuable partners. The Calvari Empire received news of War Prince Jarak's defeat with shock and disbelief. An entire armada, destroyed by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The loss sparked internal conflicts within the Calvari hierarchy. Multiple war princes claimed the right to avenge Jarak, but none wanted to face the humans after learning what happened. The Calvari expansion, which had seemed unstoppable for 3 centuries, suddenly ground to a halt as they reassessed their strategies. 6 months after the battle, Captain Helen Rivers stood on the observation deck of the lunar shipyard and watched construction of the Enterprise. The ship was enormous, 3 times the size of Discovery, with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand anything the Calvari had. Lisa Grant stood beside her, having accepted the position of chief engineer on the new vessel. "Do you think we'll see more combat?" Lisa asked. "Probably," Helen said. "The galaxy is a dangerous place, and we've made enemies, but we've also made allies. We're not alone anymore. Was it worth it? The cost?" Helen thought about the question carefully. 8,000 people had died in the battle. Thousands more in the Calvari attacks on Mars and the outlying stations. But humanity had gained a place among the stars and proven they could survive any threat. "Ask me in 100 years," she finally said. "Right now, all I know is we did what we had to do." On Earth, Admiral Collins addressed the United World Assembly in a speech that would be studied for generations. He stood at the podium with his uniform pressed and his medals gleaming, looking every bit the hero the media had made him. But his words were not about glory or triumph. They were about responsibility. "Luring the clam, and that were mengzen to the first on. We were isolated for so long," Collins said. "Protected by people we never knew existed. The Federation kept us safe while we grew and developed. Now that protection is gone, and we face the reality of a universe that is beautiful and terrible in equal measure. We have been tested. We have proven ourselves. But this is only the beginning. The question now is what kind of neighbors we will be. Will we be conquerors like the Calvari? Will we hide behind our walls? Or will we stand with our allies and build something better?" He paused and looked out at the assembled representatives. "I believe we will choose the harder path. We will explore. We will defend. We will make mistakes and learn from them. But we will do it together, human and alien alike, building a future where species stand as equals. We earned our place at the table with blood and courage. Now let's prove we deserve to stay there." Commander Vrel prepared to return to Federation space with a human diplomatic delegation. Sophie Blake would accompany him, along with 50 scientists, diplomats, and cultural ambassadors. It was the beginning of a new era of cooperation between species. Before departing, Vrel met with Collins one final time. The 2 commanders who had fought together now stood as representatives of their civilizations. "Your people surprised me," Vrel admitted. "We thought we were protecting you by keeping Earth hidden. Perhaps we were doing you a disservice. Isolation breeds weakness. You had to face threats alone, and it made you strong. You had good intentions, Collins replied. But yeah, we needed to stand on our own eventually. I'm just glad we were ready when the moment came. As the diplomatic mission departed for Federation space, construction accelerated across the solar system. New shipyards, better defenses, colonies on worlds that had seemed too distant before first contact. Humanity was expanding with the confidence of a species that knew its place in the universe. The story of how humanity entered the galactic community became legend. Not as explorers who made peaceful contact, not as traders who brought wealth, but as warriors who refused to surrender when threatened. Earth had watched from afar for all of human history, isolated and alone. Then aliens crossed the line, and humanity stepped forward to fight. The galaxy would never underestimate Earth again.